They promised eternal youth, but at a terrible price. The ancient ritual demands a sacrifice. 2026 is the year of the harvest.
Look closely at them, not at the clothes on the red carpet. Look at the skin. The same people you saw 20 years ago on the big screen, somehow, today, they look younger than they did back then. The skin is tight, but not in a normal surgical way. The eyes are clear, but there's something strange behind them.
True youth requires a proper sacrifice.
That fixed, glass-like stare. They call it biohacking. Expensive creams, special diets, stem cells, secret treatments. But deep down, you can feel it. The lie has a metallic taste. And what if everything the media serves us is just a curtain? What if, while we search for eternal youth in beauty ads and luxury products, they are extracting it from sources much more direct, behind closed doors, inside clinics you could never reach? Even with all the money in the world, there is an ancient rule whispered among the powerful. Life is not extended, it is transferred. And in 2026, that rule is no longer just a cult. It has been digitalized. It has been optimized. It has been hidden behind billion-dollar philanthropic foundations and medical research programs. 2026 is not just a year on the calendar. In their circles, 2026 is the deadline. The year when, according to calculations the public was never meant to see, the sacrifice quota must be reached in order to keep their machine alive for another decade. Why do you think the world feels so exhausted? Why does the collective energy of the planet feel like it is being drained, while they glow, radiant, powerful, full of life? Maybe because they are not just doing maintenance. They are harvesting. And you are just a spectator, watching their light feed itself from our darkness. Look at the clock. The harvest has already begun.
They are stealing time from us.
After everything we've said about rituals, secret circles, and the year 2026, maybe your first instinct is to say, okay, but this sounds too much like a legend. And you would be right to ask that, because truth should not be believed blindly. Truth has to be followed, step by step, trace by trace, from mythology into history, from history into the laboratory. And this is exactly where things become truly disturbing. Because the idea of using young blood for rejuvenation no longer lives only in old stories or forgotten rituals. In recent years, it has appeared in the cold language of modern medicine, not under the name of magic, not under the name of sacrifice, but under clean, scientific names, names that seem almost impossible to suspect. Parabiosis, young plasma, regeneration factors, longevity, biohacking, sterile words, acceptable words, words that sound like the future. But behind them hides the same ancient question. Can an old body receive life from a young one? In laboratories, researchers have spent years studying the effects of young blood on aging organisms. In animal experiments, young blood has been associated with certain signals of regeneration. This does not mean that a human being can magically become young again overnight. But it means something far more important for our story. The idea is not just myth. It is a real direction of research. And when an idea begins to promise control over aging, guess who shows up first? Those with money, those with power, those who already have everything, except the one thing they still cannot buy as it slips through their fingers: time. In Silicon Valley, the obsession with immortality is no longer a joke. Billionaires, tech founders, and massive investors have poured enormous amounts of money into longevity startups, cellular reprogramming, and technologies that promise to slow down or even reverse the aging process. Some companies in this field have reached multi-billion-dollar valuations, and the investments keep growing. And then comes the most interesting part. When the media talks about it, everything looks clean. Innovation, research, future medicine. But when you look at it symbolically, the story begins to resemble something much older. Because hundreds of years ago, Europe had its own legend about youth purchased through blood. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, a noble woman, rich, influential, surrounded by power and fear. History says she was accused of extreme cruelty, and legend says something even darker, that she bathed in the blood of young girls to preserve her beauty. And here we need to be clear, the part about bathing in blood is considered by many historians to be more legend than proven fact. But that is exactly what makes it so important. Because the legend never disappeared. It survived. It remained in the collective memory as a forbidden image, the old elite feeding on the vitality of the young. Now look at the present. We no longer have dark castles. We have private clinics. We no longer have stone chambers. We have sterile laboratories. We no longer have alchemists in black robes. We have longevity specialists, investors, and machines that look like they came from the future. But the symbol remains the same. The young body becomes a resource. Blood becomes technology. Life becomes something that can be extracted, processed, and sold. And maybe this is the true horror. Not that the ancient ritual has returned exactly as it once was, but that it has been modernized. It has been given a new name. It has been granted the aesthetic approval of science. It has been placed inside a white, clean, beautifully lit clinic, where no one says sacrifice anymore. They say treatment. They say regeneration. They say future. But when the FDA warned people to be cautious about clinics promoting infusions of plasma from young donors, the message was clear. These procedures are not approved for rejuvenation, and their effectiveness has not been proven. And still, the question remains. If it does not work, why is there so much interest? Why are the richest people in the world so obsessed with age, blood, cells, regeneration, and immortality? Maybe because, in their world, aging is no longer seen as a natural part of life.
Beyond these locked doors, a modern form of alchemy is taking place, promising eternal youth, but only for the extremely select few.
It is seen as a technical problem, and if death becomes a technical problem, then the human being becomes the experiment. This is where myth becomes reality, not because every legend is literally true, but because the fear behind the legend has now begun to be tested in modern laboratories. Elizabeth Bathory was the old image of the same obsession. Silicon Valley is the new version. And between the two, there is a red line stretching across the centuries. Young blood, youth as a resource, life as currency. And if this is only the beginning, then we have to ask something much darker. How far are those who already have all the money in the world willing to go, if they still have not managed to buy eternity?
They promised you that your youth would last forever, but they never told you the true price of their cure. The ultimate conspiracy is no longer a theory.
Now that we've talked about young blood in laboratories, about parabiosis, plasma, and the modern obsession with longevity, we have to return to the part many people ignore: symbols. Because in the world of the elites, nothing is shown directly. Everything is suggested. Everything is hidden in plain sight. A gesture, a color, an object, a seemingly ordinary photograph, a public appearance, an accessory worn at exactly the right moment. And one of the most discussed symbols in recent years is this: red shoes. For most people, they are just fashion, an eccentric detail, a style choice, a sign of luxury, confidence, or rebellion. But in communities that study occult symbolism, red shoes are interpreted very differently. Not as an accessory, but as a sign of those who have already stepped into a circle from which the ordinary person can no longer escape. A circle of blood. And this is where things become truly dark. Because if blood has always been the symbol of life, then the color red is no longer just a color. It becomes code. It becomes a mark. It becomes a silent language through which the initiated recognize one another. In ancient rituals, the circle was the boundary between the normal world and the forbidden world. When you entered the circle, you left your old identity behind. You were no longer the same person. You passed through a form of symbolic death, and then returned changed, initiated, accepted, protected, or controlled. And if we apply this logic to the modern world, the question becomes disturbing. What if these circles never disappeared? What if they only changed their setting? They no longer take place in ancient temples, but in private clubs. They are no longer led by mass priests, but by people in expensive suits, with exclusive invitations and confidentiality agreements. You no longer see the altar. You see the red carpet. You no longer see the ritual. You see the gala. You no longer see the blood. You see the shoes. And maybe that is why this symbol appears so often around celebrities, politicians, artists, and influential figures. For some, it is just fashion. But for those who look deeper, it feels like a sign repeated too often to be completely accidental. As if someone is saying, without saying anything at all, I have passed through the circle. I have paid the price. Now I belong. But what does this blood circle actually mean? We do not have to imagine it as something brutal or cinematic. The true rituals of power do not always look like they do in movies. Sometimes they are much colder, much more psychological, much better disguised. The central concept is transfer. Transfer of fear, transfer of trauma, transfer of energy, transfer of identity. In many occult systems, trauma is seen as a rupture, a moment when the human being becomes vulnerable, open, moldable. And in a dark initiation, that rupture is not healed. It is used. The person is pushed to a limit. They are made to see, accept, or participate in something that completely changes their perception of the world. After that moment, they can no longer return to the innocence they had before. And this is exactly where the connection to the red symbol appears. Red no longer represents only physical blood. It represents passage. It represents rupture. It represents the pact. In this interpretation, red shoes become the sign of those who have not only seen the circle, but stepped through it. Those who walk on blood, not necessarily in a literal sense, but in a symbolic one. They walk on a foundation built from sacrifice, compromise, silence, and the suffering of others. And if we connect this to the previous chapter, a much larger image begins to appear. On one side, we have the modern science of longevity, plasma, cells, regeneration, biohacking. On the other side, we have the ancient symbols, red, circles, initiations, elite, silence. On the surface, they seem like different worlds. But underneath, both speak about the same thing, the desire to take something from someone else in order to rise above the human condition, to no longer age like everyone else, to no longer suffer like everyone else, to no longer die like everyone else. And then comes the year 2026. For the public, 2026 is just another year. Elections, crises, technology, economic wars, social changes. Another number in an already exhausted calendar. But in symbolic language, certain dates are treated as nodes, accumulation points, moments when rituals, messages, and events are synchronized. Not because the date itself has magical power, but because the people who believe in these systems give it power. And when enough powerful people treat a date like a portal, a deadline, or a ritual anniversary. That year begins to carry weight. In this reading, 2026 becomes more than a number. It becomes a threshold, a moment when symbols become more visible, when messages become more aggressive, when the elites seem to speak to one another through images, colors, public appearances, and global events. And red shoes become only one piece of this puzzle, a small sign, but a sign that appears exactly where nothing should seem suspicious. On the red carpet, at ceremonies, in official photographs, in music videos, in magazine portraits, in carefully staged moments. And maybe this is the purpose of active symbols, to be visible enough for those who know how to read them, but ordinary enough for the rest of the world to laugh and move on. Because when you hide something in plain sight, the best protection is not secrecy. It is ridicule. Tell people it is just fashion. Tell them it is just art. Tell them it is just coincidence. And while they laugh, the symbol does its work. It marks. It communicates. It initiates. It separates the world into two categories: those who see and those who refuse to see. And this brings us to the central question of Chapter 3. If plasma therapy is the scientific face of the obsession with youth, could red shoes be the symbolic face of that same obsession? If the laboratory is the place where the body is treated, could the circle be the place where the soul is claimed? And if 2026 is the year when these signs become more frequent, more obvious, and harder to ignore, then maybe we are not just witnessing a fashion trend. Maybe we are witnessing a protocol, an initiation protocol, a hidden language for those who have passed through the circle. And the rest of us only see the traces left on the floor. Red, shining, perfectly arranged for the camera, and mysterious enough to make us ask, who is really walking on whose blood?
The world is a stage. We hold the script. What happens when the world's most powerful sit in the same room? They leave a trail of dates, waiting for the final ritual. Behind the glamour lies a hidden pattern. Every detail is meticulously planned. They think you aren't even watching. Do you see it now? I assure you, it was a simple accident. There is no cause for concern.
So far, we have talked about blood, about rituals, about symbols, and about the way the elites do not always communicate through words. Sometimes they communicate through images, through colors, through public appearances, through small details, almost invisible to the ordinary person.
Behold the true price of immortality.
But there is one sign that is not invisible at all. A sign that appears directly on the face. A sign that for years has sparked questions, theories, jokes, fear, and fascination. The black eye. You have probably seen the images. World leaders, actors, bankers, media figures, people with global influence suddenly appearing with a bruise around the eye. Sometimes they say they fell. Other times, they say it was a small accident. Other times, the explanation comes so quickly and so simply that it almost feels designed so nobody asks anything else. But for those who follow the symbols, the question remains, why does this sign appear so often in circles of power? And why does it often appear exactly during periods when these people seem to go through a change in image, energy, or even physical appearance? In a previous video, we talked about the ritual of covering one eye, about the idea that one eye, either exposed or hidden, can represent submission, initiation, control, or belonging to a larger system. But the black eye takes the symbol into an even darker place. Because here, we are no longer talking only about a gesture made for the camera. We are talking about a physical sign, a mark on the skin, a sign that looks like a trace. And in occult interpretation, the eye has always been the gateway of perception. The eye sees, but it is also seen. The eye receives light, but it can also receive programming. That is why, in many esoteric traditions, the area around the eyes is associated with identity, consciousness, and inner control. And then the theory appears. What if that mark is not just the result of a fall? What if the black eye is a mark of initiation? Or, even more disturbing, a visible side effect of a hidden process? In the context of this episode, the idea becomes even more interesting. If secret treatments for cellular regeneration exist, if experimental procedures exist, if there is an obsession with young blood, plasma, stem cells, and life extension, then the body could react in ways the public does not understand. Maybe the mark on the face is inflammation. Maybe it is a reaction to a procedure. Maybe it is a trace left behind by a symbolic initiation. Or maybe it is all of these things, wrapped inside a simple explanation for the press. Because that is exactly how the system works. When an ordinary person appears with a black eye, people ask what happened. But when a powerful person appears with the same sign, the answer comes immediately. They fell. They hit themselves. It was a minor accident. And that is it. The subject is closed. But the camera saw it. The internet saved it. And the symbol remained. The strange part is that, in some cases, after appearances like this, these people return to the public with a changed image. Brighter, smoother, more energetic. As if something has been reset. Maybe it is makeup. Maybe it is surgery. Maybe it is normal treatments. Maybe it is only our perception. But in a world where billionaires are already investing in longevity, where young blood has become a laboratory subject, and where the elites use symbols to communicate, it is hard not to see the connection. The black eye could be, in this interpretation, the part they failed to hide. A flaw in the mask. A crack in the perfect image. The sign that regeneration has a cost. Because every transformation demands a rupture. In ancient rituals, the person had to pass through pain in order to become someone else. They had to be symbolically broken, so they could later be reconstructed. In modern systems, the language has changed. We no longer talk about initiation. We talk about upgrades. We no longer talk about ritual. We talk about procedure. We no longer talk about sacrifice. We talk about treatment. But the image remains the same. A wounded eye, a changed face, a carefully controlled public appearance, and a question that refuses to disappear. What happened between the two images? Before and after. Before the bruise. After the bruise. Before the ritual. After the reset. Maybe the black eye is not the final proof, but it is a powerful visual clue, a repeated sign around those who live in worlds inaccessible to us. The world of private clinics, the world of experimental treatments, the world of closed events, the world where youth, power, and image are more important than truth. And maybe that is exactly why this symbol disturbs us so much. Because it is not placed on an object. It does not appear on a piece of clothing. It is not hidden inside a logo. It is on the face, on the human face, exactly where identity should be the hardest thing to fake. And if a red shoes show who has stepped into the circle, maybe the black eye shows who has been touched by the circle, who has gone through the process, who has been broken, rebuilt, and sent back in front of the cameras with a perfect smile already prepared. And then we have to ask, when we see a bruise on the face of the most powerful people in the world, are we seeing a simple accident? Or are we seeing the trace of a ritual we were never supposed to notice? Because in the world of the elites, signs do not disappear. They are displayed. We are simply told not to take them seriously.
They offer you eternal youth. But what is the true cost?
It is not about living in fear. It is about seeing. Because in 2026, the curtain seems to be rising more and more. What was once hidden in myths, rituals, and legends now appears in laboratories, in private clinics, in longevity conferences, and in the perfect smiles of those who seem to no longer age. The regeneration of the elites is no longer just a story whispered in the shadows. It has become an industry. And we are no longer just spectators. We are the people who must decide whether we keep applauding the show or whether we finally stand up and leave the theater. Look at their faces. Look at their shoes. Look at the signs they leave in front of the camera. And ask yourself,
The
how much
truth
of your
cannot
reality
be
is
erased,
truly yours?
only
And
hidden.
how much of it is just a stage built to feed their light?
Stay awake.
Because sometimes the truth is not hidden in darkness. It is placed directly under the spotlight.